Before we dive into this extraordinary tale, a brief word. This story explores themes of high-stakes crime, psychological tension, and the relentless search for truth in the face of the impossible. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine a fortress, a citadel of steel and concrete, a vault engineered to laugh in the face of every known threat, every explosive, every drill, every hacker. A vault so secure, its very existence was a promise of absolute, unyielding safety, a monument to human ingenuity and protection. Its walls were a foot thick, reinforced with a proprietary alloy that made diamond-tipped drills weep. Its door, a marvel of mechanical and digital engineering, weighed 20 tons and sealed with a dozen interlocking bolts, each one a triumph of metallurgy. Infrared lasers, motion sensors, seismic detectors, biometric scanners, pressure plates. Every conceivable layer of defense was woven into its very fabric. This wasn't just a vault, it was the Sterling Bank and Trust's legendary Bastion Vault, the crown jewel of their downtown Manhattan headquarters, a place where the world's most sensitive assets, from rare historical documents to untraceable bearer bonds worth billions, were kept safe. Its reputation wasn't merely good, it was flawless, unbreakable, impenetrable, until it wasn't. The morning of October 17th dawned like any other, a crisp autumn day in New York City. At precisely 7 a.m., David Miller, Sterling Bank's veteran head of security, a man whose career was built on an unbroken record of vigilance, stood before the Bastion Vault. He ran a hand over the cool, polished steel of its massive door, a ritual he'd performed thousands of times. Everything was normal. No alarms had tripped overnight. No tremors registered on the seismic sensors. The laser grid remained undisturbed. The biometric scanner glowed a steady green, signaling no unauthorized attempts. David's heart, usually a steady drumbeat of professional calm, began to accelerate, a subtle, uneasy flutter he couldn't quite place. His fingers, slightly trembling, entered the first sequence into the keypad. A soft chime, then the second, another chime. Finally, his thumb pressed against the biometric scanner, the unique whirls of his print recognized instantly. A low hydraulic hiss filled the silent corridor as the immense locking mechanism began its slow, deliberate disengagement. The bolts retracted with a series of deep, resonant thunks that echoed in the cavernous space. Then, with a final, almost mournful sigh, the 20-ton door swung inward, revealing the yawning darkness within. David stepped inside, the familiar scent of ozone and chilled air washing over him. He flicked on the main interior lights, illuminating rows upon rows of safety deposit boxes, secure shelving, and climate-controlled compartments. And that's when his world tilted. His breath hitched. The air caught in his throat like a shard of ice. The main chamber was empty. Not just a few boxes missing. Not a single shelf disturbed. The entire central compartment, the one housing the bank's most precious and irreplaceable assets, the legendary Orion diamonds, the signed Declaration of Independence manuscript, the anonymous bearer bonds totaling nearly $3 billion, was completely, utterly, inexplicably barren. The reinforced glass display cases, designed to withstand military-grade explosives, were intact. The heavy steel shelves were still bolted to the floor. But their contents, the very reason the Bastion Vault existed, were gone. Vanished. Without a trace. It wasn't a robbery. It was an erasure. There was no forced entry. No shattered glass. No pry marks on the shelves. No dust from drilling. No scorch marks from thermic lances. The floor was pristine. The air was still. The sophisticated array of internal sensors, each one capable of detecting the slightest anomaly, registered absolutely nothing. It was as if the contents had simply ceased to exist, winked out of reality, leaving behind only the ghost of their former presence. David Miller, the man who had overseen the security of billions for decades, felt a cold dread seep into his bones, colder than the vault itself. This wasn't just a breach, it was an impossibility. It defied every known principle of physics, every criminal methodology, every logical explanation. The Bastion Vault, the Unbreakable Vault, had been emptied, and the terrifying question that screamed in the silence of that hollow chamber, a question that would soon grip the entire financial world, was not who had done it, or even what they had taken. It was simply this: how? How do you steal from a vault that cannot be entered? How do you vanish billions without leaving a single solitary clue? This wasn't just a heist, it was a phenomenon, a ghost in the machine, and it had just begun. And it had just begun. The first rays of a new Tuesday morning painted the glass towers of downtown New York with a deceptive calm. Inside the polished, intimidating fortress known as Fortress Trust Bank, however, chaos was a silent, suffocating presence. The air in the executive suites was thick with disbelief, fear, and a desperate scramble for answers. But there were no answers. Only an empty vault, a staggering deficit, and a riddle that defied logic. The call had come in just after midnight, a frantic, almost unhinged report from the bank's head of security, a man named Robert Jenkins, to the FBI's New York field office. Agent Michael Vance, a man whose career had been built on untangling impossible knots, received the notification. Vance was a legend in the bureau, known for his methodical approach and an uncanny ability to see patterns where others saw only static. He'd handled everything from international cyber heists to intricate embezzlement schemes, but even the terse, coded language of the initial report made his seasoned instincts prickle. This was different. His partner, Agent Emily Chan, was already downloading preliminary data when Vance arrived at the office. Emily was younger, sharp, with a mind like a steel trap and a natural aptitude for digital forensics. She was the perfect foil to Vance's old-school grit, bringing a fresh, tech-savvy perspective to their investigations. Fortress Trust, Emily stated, her voice low, the screen of her tablet casting a pale glow on her face. The Unbreakable Vault. You know the one, Michael? It's practically a landmark. Supposedly impenetrable. Biometric scans, retinal recognition, multi-layered laser grids, pressure plates, sonic detectors, electromagnetic shielding, a 2-meter-thick reinforced steel door, all backed by a dedicated, off-site security team monitoring 24/7. Even the air inside is filtered to prevent dust accumulation that could obscure sensors. It's the Fort Knox of Manhattan, holding assets for some of the wealthiest individuals and corporations on the planet. Vance nodded, already pulling on his Kevlar vest. I know it, Emily. It's a point of pride for them. Their marketing practically screams impossible to breach. What's the damage? Emily's eyes widened slightly. Initial estimates are staggering. Over $3 billion in various currencies and securities vanished. Not a trace, not a single alarm tripped. No physical breach, no digital footprint. Vance paused, his hand on the door frame. No digital footprint? You mean no external hack, no malware? Nothing detected on their servers? That's what they're claiming. And their internal security systems are among the best in the world. Their network infrastructure is isolated, air-gapped from the public internet for critical financial transactions. It's practically hermetically sealed in the digital realm too. Impossible, Vance murmured, more to himself than to Emily. Nothing is impossible, Emily. Just incredibly difficult to explain. Let's go. The scene at Fortress Trust was exactly as Vance had envisioned. A controlled explosion of panic. Uniformed officers, forensics teams, and grim-faced bank executives milled about the vast, opulent lobby. The CEO of Fortress Trust, David Miller, a man usually radiating an aura of unshakable confidence, looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. His face was ashen, his tie askew, and his eyes darted around with a haunted desperation. Agent Vance, Agent Chan, Miller greeted them, his voice hoarse. Thank God you're here. This is a nightmare. A catastrophe. Vance cut to the chase. Mr. Miller, can you walk us through what happened from your perspective? Miller gestured towards a conference room, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city, now a stark contrast to the internal turmoil. Robert Jenkins, our head of security, discovered it during his routine morning check. The vault's status indicators were all green. Every single one. No alerts, no anomalies, no system failures. The door was sealed intact. But when he performed the manual audit, cross-referencing the inventory with the physical contents, it was gone. Billions. Just gone. And no alarm ever sounded? Emily pressed. Not a peep, Miller confirmed, running a hand through his thinning hair. The vault's primary security system, its secondary, even its tertiary fail-safes. All silent. It's like the money simply evaporated. We've had our internal team scour every log, every sensor reading, every camera feed. Nothing. No forced entry, no unauthorized access codes used, no biometric bypass, no thermal signatures, no vibrations, no magnetic fluctuations. Not a single pixel on the hundreds of cameras surrounding the vault, and its approach showed anything out of the ordinary. The last recorded activity was a routine deposit by one of our senior tellers at 5 p.m. yesterday, everything perfectly accounted for. By 7 a.m. this morning it was empty. Vance walked towards the vault itself, a monolithic presence in the bank's deepest sub-basement. It was indeed a marvel of engineering, a defiant statement against the very concept of theft. The door alone weighed several tons, its surface unblemished, its intricate locking mechanism apparently untouched. Forensics technicians were meticulously dusting for prints, scanning for residue, and running spectrometers over every inch of the polished steel, but their movements were slow, almost ritualistic, betraying a sense of futility. "Agent Vance," a forensics tech called out, looking up from a scanner, "we've got nothing. No tool marks, no heat signatures, no chemical traces. It's perfectly clean. Not a single scratch on the door, not a scuff on the floor. It looks like it hasn't been touched since it was last opened for a legitimate transaction." Vance knelt, examining the floor directly in front of the vault. Not a speck of dust disturbed. He ran a gloved hand over the smooth, cold steel of the vault door. Felt utterly impregnable. He leaned in, listening, as if the vault itself might whisper its secrets. But there was only the low hum of the building's ventilation system. "Show me the interior," Vance requested, his voice calm, steady, masking the growing unease he felt. This wasn't just a challenge. It was an affront to everything he understood about crime. With a series of complex biometric and keycard authentications, the vault door slowly, ponderously swung inward. The interior was a cavernous space, lined with rows of empty shelves and open deposit boxes. The air within was sterile, cold, and heavy with the scent of ozone from the security systems. The sheer emptiness was a physical blow, a gaping void where billions had rested hours before. It was like looking at the hollowed-out skull of a giant. Emily, ever the pragmatist, was already at work, scanning the interior with specialized equipment. No residual energy signatures consistent with high-frequency cutting tools, no explosive residue, no signs of tunneling, no indication of any kind of structural compromise, she reported, her voice laced with an almost scientific wonder at the sheer absence of evidence. The internal cameras are all intact, all feeds accounted for. No gaps in recording, nothing suspicious. It's like the money just dematerialized. Vance walked slowly into the vault, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He ran his hand over the now empty shelves where stacks of currency and precious metals would have been. He checked the individual deposit boxes, all standing open, their contents utterly gone. There were no signs of disarray, no hurried ransacking. Everything was neat, orderly, almost respectful in its emptiness. It was as if someone had simply walked in, politely gathered everything, and then walked out. But that was impossible. "Tell me about the vault's environmental controls," Vance asked Robert Jenkins, who stood beside him, shoulders slumped. "Hermetically sealed. Air filtration, temperature and humidity control. Any deviation, even a slight change in air pressure, triggers an alarm." "Nothing. The system logs show perfectly stable conditions all night." Jenkins swallowed hard. "Agent, I've been in security for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this. My team is the best. We've run drills, simulations, every known method of infiltration. This vault has withstood them all. It's supposed to be impregnable. And yet," Vance pointed out calmly, "it was breached. Or at least its contents were removed. We need to consider possibilities that go beyond known methods." He turned back to Emily. "Emily, I need you to go through every single log file, every frame of surveillance footage from the past 48 hours. Not just the vault, but the entire building. Look for anything, however minor, however seemingly insignificant. A flicker, a momentary glitch, a power surge, a network hiccup. Anything that deviates from the absolute norm." "Already on it, Michael," Emily replied, her fingers flying across her tablet. "But so far, it's a perfect record of nothing." Vance stepped out of the vault, the heavy door closing behind him with a soft, final thud. He looked at David Miller, the CEO, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Miller, this isn't just a theft. This is a statement. Someone has found a way to bypass every known security measure, physical and digital, without leaving a trace. This suggests a level of sophistication, resources, and perhaps even audacity that is almost unprecedented." Miller's face was a mask of despair. "But how, Agent? How could anyone do this? We pour hundreds of millions into our security. We hired the best consultants, the most brilliant engineers. They certified it. They said it couldn't be done. Vance looked back at the imposing vault door, now once again sealed, a silent sentinel guarding an empty space. He thought about Emily's earlier words. It's like the money just dematerialized. The sheer absence of evidence was the most chilling detail. No forced entry, no broken circuit, no digital ghost in the machine. It was as if the laws of physics of crime had been temporarily suspended. That, Mr. Miller, Vance said, his voice dropping to a low, intense register, is precisely the question we intend to answer. But I can tell you this much already. Whoever did this didn't just steal money. They stole a secret about how to be invisible. And until we figure out that secret, this vault and every other unbreakable vault in the world is nothing more than an empty box. He turned to Emily. Emily, I want you to focus on the impossible. Forget what we know about how heists are done. Think about what we don't know. Think about what could allow someone to operate outside the visible spectrum of technology and physics. This wasn't a smash and grab. This wasn't a sophisticated hack. This was something else entirely. Something ethereal. The weight of the impossible hung in the air. A silent, mocking challenge. The unbreakable vault had been broken, not by force, not by fraud, but by an unseen hand, a silent whisper in the dark. And the more Vance and Sean looked, the more they realized the true horror. The thief hadn't just taken billions. They had taken the very understanding of how the world worked. And that was far more dangerous. The true horror, Mark Vance and Evelyn Sean realized, wasn't just the sheer scale of the theft, the billions spirited away without a trace. It was the chilling implication that something far more fundamental had been stolen. Something that underpinned the very fabric of global stability. The thief hadn't just breached a vault. They had seemingly plucked the very understanding of how the world worked, leaving behind a void that threatened to unravel everything. The vault in question wasn't just a repository for wealth. It was the impenetrable sanctum of Dr. Eris Thorne, a reclusive genius revered and feared in equal measure, a man who had pioneered the very concept of predictive analytics on a global scale. What he guarded inside wasn't gold bullion or priceless artifacts. It was the Nexus Protocol. The Nexus Protocol wasn't merely an algorithm. It was an adaptive, self-learning artificial intelligence, a digital oracle that had, for the past decade, quietly served as an unseen architect of global equilibrium. Developed by Thorne's clandestine research firm Chronos Dynamics, the protocol was designed to model every conceivable global variable: financial markets, geopolitical tensions, environmental shifts, even the intricate web of human behavior. It predicted with uncanny accuracy the cascading effects of any given event, from a minor tariff change in one country to a major political upheaval in another. More than that, it didn't just predict, it learned. It was constantly refining its understanding, identifying potential instabilities before they manifested, and quietly, subtly, suggesting optimal interventions to maintain a delicate, precarious balance. Its existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to a handful of global power brokers who occasionally consulted Thorne for its insights, never fully grasping the sheer depth of its power. The Nexus Protocol was, in essence, the world's most sophisticated early warning system, its most potent strategic advisor, and its most reliable arbiter of future probabilities. Its loss wasn't just a financial blow. It was the abrupt removal of the world's digital compass, its crystal ball, its invisible hand of systemic stability. It's like someone stole gravity, Evelyn Chun muttered, her fingers flying across a holographic display in Thorne's pristine, sterile command center, a room now buzzing with the nervous energy of investigators who felt utterly out of their depth. We're not just missing data. We're missing the logic that derived that data, the capacity to even understand what's coming next. Dr. Eris Thorne, a gaunt man with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the universe, sat hunched over a console, his face a mask of profound despair. The protocol was more than just a predictive engine, Detective Vance, he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. It was the culmination of my life's work, a testament to the idea that chaos could be understood, even tamed. Without it, we are blind. We are adrift. Vance ran a hand through his short, sandy hair, his brow furrowed in concentration. So the thief didn't just want money, Dr. Thorne. They wanted control. Or perhaps they wanted to create chaos. Thorne slowly shook his head. To steal the Nexus Protocol, one would need to understand its very essence, its intricate architecture. It's not a simple file transfer. It's a sentient, evolving entity. This isn't just a theft. It's an abduction of pure intellect. And the how remains an agonizing, impossible riddle. The physical evidence, or lack thereof, continued to torment Vance and Chun. The vault door, a masterpiece of engineering, remained pristine. No drill marks, no explosive residue, no thermal signatures. The internal sensors, a mesh of quantum entanglement detectors and molecular scanners, had registered nothing. No entry, no exit. The protocol, housed in a self-contained air-gapped server cluster, simply wasn't there anymore. It was as if it had dematerialized, leaving behind only the ghost of its presence. We've scoured every digital footprint, every network log, every remote access attempt, Evelyn reported, her voice laced with frustration. There's no trace. No IP address, no backdoor, no zero-day exploit that could have bypassed Thorne's proprietary encryption. It's a clean slate. Too clean. Their initial investigation had, predictably, led them down a series of dead ends. They had interrogated Thorne's small, fiercely loyal team of engineers and researchers, each undergoing extensive background checks and polygraph tests. All were cleared. No disgruntled employees, no ideological defectors. They had looked at rival tech companies, nation-states known for their cyber warfare capabilities. But these were conventional adversaries, and this was an unconventional crime. There was no brute force, no sophisticated hack, just an inexplicable disappearance. This isn't about breaking into the vault, Evelyn, Vance mused, pacing the sterile floor. It's about making the vault believe it was never breached. Or perhaps making the vault irrelevant. What if the theft didn't happen through the security but around it? Or even within it? The implications of the Nexus protocol's absence began to ripple outwards, subtly at first, like stones dropped into a vast interconnected pond. Within days, global financial markets, usually a predictable beast for those who understood its underlying currents, began to exhibit erratic behavior. Minor currencies experienced inexplicable surges and drops. Commodity prices fluctuated wildly, defying established economic models. Analysts, accustomed to the subtle, almost imperceptible guidance the Nexus protocol had provided through various public data streams and economic indicators, found themselves bewildered. The market wasn't just volatile. It was unpredictable in a way it hadn't been in decades. Geopolitical tensions, usually kept in check by a delicate dance of diplomacy and deterrence, began to flare in unexpected corners of the globe. Minor border disputes escalated with alarming speed. Peace talks stalled without explanation, and long-dormant separatist movements suddenly reignited. Without the protocol to model the intricate web of cause and effect, world leaders were making decisions in the dark, reacting to events rather than anticipating them. The world was losing its strategic foresight, its ability to navigate the complex currents of international relations. It's like a symphony orchestra suddenly lost its conductor, Evelyn observed grimly, pointing to a series of news feeds displaying a chaotic mosaic of global unrest. The individual musicians are still playing, but without the overarching guidance, the harmony is breaking down. It's not a catastrophic crash, not yet. It's a slow, creeping dissonance. Vance nodded, his gaze fixed on the screen, a chilling realization dawning on him. The thief didn't just steal a powerful tool, Evelyn. They stole the future. Or at least our ability to understand and shape it. They spent countless hours poring over the vault's design schematics, the protocol's architectural blueprints, and Thorne's extensive research notes. Vance, with his street-smart intuition, focused on the human element, trying to imagine a motive so grand it would justify such an audacious, impossible crime. Evelyn, immersed in the digital realm, meticulously dissected every line of code, every security measure, searching for the phantom entry point. "Look at this, Mark," Evelyn called out suddenly, her voice sharp with discovery. She zoomed in on a section of Thorne's early research notes, dated almost 15 years prior. It wasn't about the Nexus protocol itself, but a theoretical concept Thorne had explored before its development: quantum entanglement for information transfer, non-local data extraction. Vance leaned closer, squinting at the dense scientific text. "What is that, some kind of sci-fi teleportation for data?" "Not quite teleportation," Evelyn corrected, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. "More like instantaneous, secure data replication without a physical medium. theoretical, incredibly complex, and requiring an unimaginable amount of computational power and a perfect, impossible sync between two entangled systems. Thorne abandoned it, said it was too unstable, too dangerous, and ultimately beyond current technological capabilities. He deemed it a ghost key, a theoretical method to unlock any system from anywhere without leaving a trace, because the data isn't transferred in the traditional sense, it's mirrored. A ghost key, Vance repeated, the words hanging heavy in the air. So the thief didn't break in, they just copied it from the outside, without ever touching the vault. Evelyn nodded slowly, her face pale. If someone somehow managed to perfect Thorne's abandoned ghost key concept, then the Nexus protocol wasn't stolen. It was replicated. And if that's true, Mark, then we're not dealing with a conventional thief. We're dealing with someone who possesses technology or an understanding of physics decades ahead of anything we know. Someone who can bend reality itself. The implications were staggering. If the thief possessed such capabilities, their motive wasn't merely wealth or power, but something far more profound, far more terrifying. And if they could replicate the Nexus protocol, what else could they do? What other secrets could they mirror? What other systems could they access? What other realities could they reshape? The Unbreakable Vault had not been breached. It had been rendered irrelevant. And in that chilling realization, Vance and Chun understood the true scale of their adversary. They weren't hunting a person. They were hunting a concept, a phantom, a whisper of a future that had just been stolen from under humanity's nose. And the world, unaware of the invisible force that had once guided it, was slowly, imperceptibly, beginning to drift into uncharted, dangerous waters. The drift wasn't a sudden cataclysm, not a meteor strike or a global war. It was far more insidious, a subtle unraveling at the seams of reality itself. Stock markets, once predictable in their volatility, now swung wildly on no apparent news, baffling analysts. Weather patterns grew erratic, not just extreme, but profoundly illogical, with blizzards hitting tropical regions and deserts experiencing unprecedented deluges, all without a discernible scientific explanation. People reported a pervasive sense of unease, a nagging feeling that something fundamental had shifted, a loss of direction despite no obvious change in their daily lives. Small, inexplicable technological glitches became commonplace. Satellites momentarily losing orientation, internet outages that defied network diagnostics, even smart devices occasionally displaying random, nonsensical data. It was as if the very fabric of cause and effect had been subtly frayed, and the collective human subconscious, without understanding why, registered the void. This wasn't a problem for economists or meteorologists alone. It became a problem for law enforcement, specifically for those tasked with understanding the unprecedented. The theft at the global repository wasn't just a breach. It was a theoretical impossibility. The vault, a marvel of engineering, had simply opened. No alarms, no forced entry, no fingerprints, no trace of heat, cold, sonic, or kinetic impact. It was a ghost of a crime, a perfect vacuum where evidence should have been. That's where Detective Michael Vance came in. Vance wasn't your typical detective. He was less about blunt force and more about the elegant solution, the invisible thread that connected disparate facts. His reputation preceded him, a man who saw patterns where others saw chaos, a quiet observer with an unnerving ability to read between the lines of a crime scene. When the call came in, he was deep in a cold case file, a missing persons report from a decade ago that still gnawed at him. The voice on the other end of the line was clipped, urgent. "Vance, we have something. Global repository. Unprecedented." That single word, unprecedented, was enough to pull him from his labyrinth of old data. He arrived at the repository under a sky that seemed unusually muted, a pale, washed-out blue that offered no warmth. The building itself, a monolithic testament to security, seemed to hum with a silent, bewildered energy. Uniformed officers and a gaggle of bewildered scientists milled about, their faces a mixture of frustration and disbelief. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Detective Vance, a stern woman in a crisp suit, greeted him. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Reed, head of repository security. Her eyes, usually sharp and confident, were shadowed with a profound weariness. "Thank you for coming. This defies everything we know." Vance nodded, his gaze already sweeping past her, taking in the controlled chaos. He preferred to observe first, to let the scene speak to him before anyone else tried to explain it away. The vault stood before them, an imposing steel behemoth that was supposed to be impervious. Its massive door, a formidable barrier of layered composites and advanced alloys, was now slightly ajar, just enough to reveal the inky blackness within. It wasn't blasted open. It hadn't been pried or cut. It looked as though someone had simply unlocked it. He stepped inside, the sterile air of the vault chilling him more than the actual temperature. The interior was a masterpiece of minimalist design, built for function and absolute security. Rows of biometric scanners, pressure plates, laser grids, all utterly inert. They hadn't been bypassed. They hadn't even been triggered. It was as if the very concept of their existence had been temporarily suspended. "We've run every diagnostic," Dr. Reed explained, her voice tight with frustration. "Replayed every camera feed, analyzed every sensor log. There's nothing. No breach signature, no energy fluctuations, no external interference." The system registered the door opening as if it were an authorized access, but there was no authorization. Vance walked slowly, his eyes meticulously scanning every surface. He wasn't looking for the obvious. The obvious wasn't here. He was looking for the almost nothing, the infinitesimal deviation. The floor, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected his somber expression. He knelt not to examine a specific spot but to get a different perspective. He ran a gloved hand over the cold steel of a deactivated laser grid. Felt normal. Too normal. What was stolen? Vance asked, his voice low, almost a whisper in the vast space. Dr. Reed hesitated, glancing at a few other scientists standing nearby, their faces grim. We believe it was the Kronos device prototype." The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Vance straightened, turning to face her. The Kronos device. The theoretical predictive algorithm. The one that was supposed to map future probabilities with near-perfect accuracy. Not just map, Dr. Reed corrected, her voice barely audible. It could subtly influence. A nudge here, a redirect there. It wasn't about changing destiny, but about optimizing outcomes, guiding humanity towards its most beneficial possible future. It was a safeguard against global crises, a silent architect of stability. A cold dread began to coil in Vance's stomach. This wasn't a bank robbery. This was something far, far worse. And now it's gone. Vanished, she confirmed. Without a trace. The data core, the quantum entanglement matrix, the entire conceptual framework. It's as if it was phased out of existence. Vance continued his methodical search. He ran a specialized atmospheric sensor, not expecting anything but a faint, almost imperceptible reading flickered across the screen. An anomaly. A residual energy signature unlike anything he'd ever encountered. It wasn't electromagnetic, wasn't thermal, wasn't acoustic. It was something else. A faint hum, a vibration beyond the spectrum of human hearing, seemed to resonate through the very structure of the vault. He pressed his ear against the cold steel of the vault wall. Nothing. Yet the sensor insisted. He paused by the central pedestal where the Kronos device would have rested. The surface was pristine, not a speck of dust. But as he leaned closer, his eyes, accustomed to seeking out the minute, caught something. A shimmering. Not a reflection, but an almost invisible distortion in the air, like heat haze over a desert road, but contained within a tiny circular area on the pedestal. It was as if the air itself had been momentarily stressed, then snapped back, leaving behind a subtle, lingering echo. He reached out, his fingertips brushing the spot. He felt nothing. Yet he knew. This was it. The signature. You said authorized access, Vance mused, turning back to Dr. Reed. But no authorization. What if the authorization wasn't from here? What if it was from nowhere? Dr. Reed frowned, clearly struggling to grasp the abstract nature of his question. I don't understand, Detective. Neither do I fully, Vance admitted. But consider this. If something was stolen that could subtly influence the future, and it's suddenly gone, what happens to the future? He walked out of the vault, the bizarre energy signature clinging to his sensor, a ghost in the machine. The world outside the repository still seemed muted, the sky still a pale imitation of itself. He looked at the faces of the people hurrying past, their expressions subtly more anxious, their steps a fraction less purposeful. The stock market had just dipped another 2 points, an unexplained anomaly. A news report flickered on a public screen, detailing yet another unprecedented weather event in the Pacific. The drift wasn't just a global phenomenon, it was a symptom. The world wasn't just losing its way, it was losing its guide. The Chronos device wasn't just a piece of technology, it was the very compass of humanity's progress. And whoever had taken it hadn't just stolen an object, they had stolen the future itself, leaving behind a chaotic, rudderless present. Vance found himself back in his office late that night, the peculiar energy reading from the vault still glowing faintly on his tablet. He tried to cross-reference it with known energy types, with exotic particles, with theoretical physics. Nothing matched. It was unique, alien. He sifted through the scant data the repository had provided. No external cameras had captured anything. No internal sensors had been tripped. It was a perfect, impossible crime. But the distortion he'd seen on the pedestal, the faint, nondescript energy signature, they were something. A whisper from the void. He pulled up a map of the world, staring at the flashing red alerts for economic instability, environmental anomalies, and social unrest. It was all happening too fast, too coincidentally. The world was drifting, and the silence from the vault, that impossible, perfect silence, was screaming a terrible truth. This wasn't an act of random opportunism. This was precise. This was deliberate. And whoever was behind it wasn't just an ordinary thief. They were someone or something that understood the very fabric of reality well enough to unravel it. The Chronos device wasn't just stolen, it was removed. And the implications of that distinction were beginning to terrify Michael Vance more than any criminal he had ever pursued. He knew then, with a chilling certainty, that he wasn't just chasing a thief. He was chasing an echo, a shadow that moved between dimensions, leaving behind only the subtle, telltale distortion of a world losing its way. His tablet buzzed again, a new alert. A peculiar seismic tremor registered in an abandoned research facility in the remote Nevada desert, far from any known fault line. A tremor that carried a faint, familiar energy signature. Michael stared at the tablet, a cold dread seeping into his bones. Familiar. The word echoed in his mind, triggering a cascade of fragmented memories, classified reports, and late-night simulations. He zoomed in on the coordinates, cross-referencing them with every known government installation, every private research lab, every forgotten black site. Nothing. The location was a blank canvas on his digital map. Yet the tremor was undeniable. And that signature, it was almost identical to the residual energy readings they'd painstakingly collected from the perimeter of the Fort Knox vault after the breach. A unique, oscillating frequency, barely detectable, a byproduct of the quantum entanglement field that was supposed to make the vault impenetrable. But how? Why? And in an abandoned research facility in the middle of nowhere? His mind raced, connecting seemingly disparate dots. The precision of the heist, the complete lack of physical entry, the impossible speed. It wasn't just a group of skilled thieves. It was an operation backed by cutting-edge, highly classified technology. Technology that, as far as he knew, only a handful of nations and even fewer private entities had ever even conceptualized. And now a tremor in the desert, radiating the telltale signature of that very technology. He didn't just have a heist on his hands, he had a ghost. A ghost of a project, a ghost of a theoretical weapon, now made terrifyingly real. He immediately initiated a secure comms channel, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. "Agent Miller," he barked into the mic, his voice tight with urgency. "I need every satellite image, every drone feed, every historical record of a sector designation, codenamed Ares 7 in the Nevada desert. Coordinates are..." He rattled off the precise location. "Prioritize this. Top clearance. I want everything you can pull yesterday. Ares 7. The name surfaced from the deepest recesses of his memory. A rumored, highly covert experimental facility, whispered about in hushed tones during his early days in intelligence. A place where theoretical physics met military application, where the impossible was routinely attempted. It had been officially decommissioned decades ago, its existence erased from public record, its purpose shrouded in layers of classified secrecy. But the energy signature suggested it wasn't so abandoned after all. While Miller's team scrambled, Michael pulled up his own encrypted files, accessing a database he hadn't touched in years. Files related to Project Chimera, the codename given to the quantum entanglement security system designed for the Fort Knox vault. He cross-referenced the tremor's signature with every known iteration and theoretical byproduct of Chimera. The match was almost perfect. Not a full-scale deployment, but a significant localized test. Someone was not just using the technology, they were refining it. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about the stolen gold. It was about the weaponization of a technology designed for ultimate defense. It was about power on an unprecedented scale. And the people behind it had just announced their presence with a subtle, yet unmistakable tremor in the desert. He grabbed his go bag, a worn canvas duffel perpetually packed with essentials for rapid deployment. He didn't wait for Miller's full report. He couldn't. Every instinct, every fiber of his being screamed that time was of the essence. This wasn't a desk job anymore. This was a race against an invisible enemy who clearly held a terrifying advantage. He made a quick call to Emily, his lead analyst, her sharp mind often spotting patterns where others saw chaos. "Emily, I'm heading out. Nevada desert. Aries 7. If I don't check in within 8 hours, you send a full tactical team, no questions asked. And if anything happens to me, make sure Director Vance gets all my files on Chimera and this new tremor." "Michael, what are you talking about?" Emily's voice was laced with concern. "Aries 7? That place is a myth. And Chimera was supposed to be impenetrable. It's not a myth anymore, Emily. And apparently, neither was the vault. Something far bigger is at play here. Just trust me. 8 hours." He hung up before she could protest further, knowing he was walking into something profoundly dangerous, perhaps even beyond his capabilities. But he had to know. He had to understand. The drive was long, the desolate landscape of the Nevada desert stretching endlessly under a relentless sun. As he drew closer to the coordinates, the road deteriorated, eventually giving way to a barely discernible track of cracked earth and loose gravel. Dust billowed behind his unmarked SUV, a lonely plume against the vast empty sky. Miles from any civilization, the silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of tires and the hum of the engine. Finally, a faint metallic glint appeared on the horizon. As he approached, the glint resolved into a series of decaying fences, topped with rusted barbed wire, surrounding what looked like a collection of dilapidated concrete structures. No guards, no lights, no signs of life. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. An abandoned relic of a bygone era, slowly succumbing to the elements. But Michael knew better. The energy signature from his tablet, though faint, pulsed stronger here. This place was a deception. He parked his SUV a discreet distance away, concealed behind a cluster of scraggly Joshua trees. He donned a tactical vest, checked his sidearm, and grabbed a compact drone from his bag. Sending it aloft, he maneuvered it silently towards the facility, its tiny camera feeding live images back to his tablet. The drone's view confirmed his suspicions. While the outer perimeter was crumbling, the central complex, though weathered, showed signs of recent activity. A faint, almost imperceptible sheen on some of the windows, indicating modern reinforced glass. Patches of newer concrete blending seamlessly with the old. And most tellingly, a barely visible, almost perfectly circular depression in the earth near the largest structure. A depression that mirrored the exact dimensions of the quantum entanglement field generator used for the vault. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't just a research facility. It was a testing ground. Or worse, a training ground. The perpetrators of the Fort Knox heist hadn't just used the technology. They had perfected it here. They had understood its nuances, its vulnerabilities, its raw power. As the drone circled the largest building, its thermal imaging picked up residual heat signatures from within. Not enough for a full-scale operation, but certainly enough to indicate recent occupation. A shiver ran down Michael's spine. He wasn't just looking for clues, he was potentially walking into a trap, or at the very least a hornet's nest. He disembarked, moving with the practiced stealth of an agent who had spent years in the field. The desert wind whispered through the dry brush, a mournful sound. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every creak of metal a warning. He approached the main gate, finding the lock rusted through, seemingly broken by time. But a closer inspection revealed a clean cut, masked by strategically placed dust and debris. Someone had recently bypassed it, making it look like natural decay. He slipped through the gate, his senses heightened, his grip on his weapon firm. The air inside the perimeter was still, heavy with the scent of dust and ozone. He moved from building to building, checking each one. Most were empty, their interiors stripped bare, echoing with the ghosts of past experiments. But the largest structure, a squat windowless block, drew him in. This was where the energy signature was strongest. This was where the tremor had originated. The main entrance was a heavy steel door, ostensibly sealed shut. But again, the illusion of decay was carefully maintained. A faint scratch mark, almost invisible to the naked eye, ran along the frame, suggesting a recent forced entry, or perhaps a programmed entry. He found a small, almost imperceptible panel hidden beneath a loose piece of siding. His universal scanner, a device he rarely used, chirped to life, identifying a sophisticated biometric lock now deactivated. Someone had gone to great lengths to make this place look abandoned, while actively using it. And whoever had deactivated this lock had done so recently. He pushed the door open cautiously, stepping into a cavernous, dimly lit space. The air was cold, stale, and smelled faintly of burnt electronics and something metallic, almost like ozone. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light filtering through high, grimy windows. The room was vast, dominated by a massive circular platform in the center, surrounded by an array of heavy-duty machinery, all powered down but clearly state-of-the-art. His eyes immediately fixed on the platform. It was scarred, singed, and bore the distinct impression of something immensely heavy having rested upon it for an extended period. And around its perimeter, faint, almost ethereal scorch marks, consistent with an extreme energy discharge. A test. A very powerful test. He approached the platform, his scanner now buzzing furiously. The readings were off the charts: residual quantum energy, localized gravitational fluctuations, and traces of an exotic isotope he'd only ever seen in theoretical physics papers related to Project Chimera. This wasn't just related to the Vault's technology. This was the Vault's technology, being pushed to its absolute limits. This facility, Ares 7, wasn't just a testing ground, it was the forge. The place where the impossible had been made possible. The place where the Unbreakable Vault had been systematically analyzed, reverse-engineered, and ultimately broken. As he processed this monumental discovery, his gaze fell upon a small, unassuming console tucked away in a corner, partially hidden by a stack of discarded equipment. It was a control panel remarkably intact with a single glowing screen. He moved towards it, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and exhilaration. This could be it. The key to everything. He activated the screen. It flickered to life, displaying a complex array of schematics and data logs. His eyes widened as he saw the words, Project Chimera Phase 4, Field Deployment Optimization. And beneath it, a series of timestamps, the most recent one just 3 days ago. They hadn't just tested it, they had deployed it. And they were still working on it. He scrolled through the logs, his mind racing to keep up with the technical jargon. Then, a name jumped out at him, recurring frequently in the operational reports, often associated with command decisions and critical modifications. Subject Echo. No last name, just a code name. But the details associated with Subject Echo painted a chilling picture. An individual with unparalleled expertise in quantum mechanics, advanced robotics, and system infiltration. An individual who had seemingly led the charge in weaponizing Chimera. And then another log entry, a recent one, caught his eye. It was a secure communication transcript, dated just hours before the Fort Knox heist. A brief cryptic message: Phase 4 complete. Target acquired. Proceed with extraction. Ensure no trace remains. Echo out. Michael felt a cold wave wash over him. Extraction. No trace. Echo. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The heist wasn't just about the gold. It was a demonstration. A proof of concept for a technology that could bypass any defense anywhere. And Echo was the mastermind, the ghost in the machine. Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible hum started to vibrate through the floor. It wasn't the sound of machinery powering up. It was deeper, more resonant, a low thrum that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock of the facility. The air grew heavy, charged with an unfamiliar energy. Michael's scanner, still in his hand, began to shriek, its indicators flashing wildly, detecting an energy spike unlike anything he had ever witnessed. It was the Chimera signature, but amplified, distorted, unstable. The hum intensified, growing into a deafening roar. Cracks spiderwebbed across the concrete floor. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Alarms, long silent, suddenly blared to life. their piercing wails echoing through the vast space. The ground beneath his feet bucked violently. This wasn't a test, it was a catastrophic event. He stumbled, regaining his balance as the entire structure groaned under immense strain. The console screen flickered, displaying a new, urgent message. Critical system overload. Quantum field instability. Evacuate immediately. Michael realized with a jolt of terror that he wasn't just in a research facility. He was in a ticking time bomb. Someone had initiated a self-destruct sequence, or worse, the experimental technology itself was spiraling out of control. He had found the forge, but he was about to be incinerated within it. He spun around, desperate to find an exit, as the roar grew to an unbearable crescendo, the very air vibrating with destructive power. The ceiling began to collapse, sending massive chunks of concrete crashing down around him. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before the entire facility imploded, taking him and all his discoveries with it. Michael didn't hesitate. The roar was deafening, a monstrous symphony of steel tearing, concrete pulverizing, and systems failing. He saw it then, not the main vault door, but a smaller, unassuming panel recessed into the wall directly opposite the central pedestal, almost invisible against the reinforced titanium. This wasn't about the gold or the jewels. It was about the information, the secret they'd been hunting. He knew it with a primal certainty that bypassed logic. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, he lunged, his fingers flying over the holographic interface that had just moments ago seemed impenetrable. The system was failing, its complex algorithms unraveling under the stress of the implosion. This was his one chance, the chaotic breakdown acting as an unexpected key. A flicker of green, a brief, high-pitched whine that was instantly swallowed by the surrounding destruction, and the panel hissed open. Inside, nestled in a cradle of what looked like solidified light, was a single obsidian-black data chip. No larger than his thumb, it pulsed with a faint internal luminescence, an almost imperceptible thrum of contained power. The Nexus drive. He didn't know how he knew the name, but it resonated deep within him. This was it. This was everything. He snatched the chip, the surface cool and impossibly smooth against his gloved fingers. As he pulled it free, the cradle retracted, and the panel slammed shut with a final, metallic clang that managed to cut through the din for a fraction of a second. The very act of removing the drive seemed to accelerate the facility's demise. A guttural groan ripped through the structure, deeper and more resonant than anything before. The primary containment field around the vault shimmered violently, then sparked, spitting arcs of electricity before collapsing inward with a sound like a million shards of glass shattering simultaneously. The air instantly became thick with pulverized concrete dust and the acrid smell of ozone. What little light remained flickered, then died, plunging him into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the intermittent, desperate flashes of failing emergency systems and the sickening glow of overloaded conduits. Michael shoved the Nexus drive into a specially shielded, internal pouch within his suit, securing it with a magnetic clasp. His mission was complete, but his survival was far from guaranteed. He spun around, dodging a massive slab of ceiling that detached and crashed where he'd been standing moments before, sending a shockwave through the ground that knocked him momentarily off balance. He pushed off the crumbling wall, propelling himself towards the escape route they'd meticulously planned, a rarely used service tunnel, one that led to the ventilation shafts, designed for maintenance drones, not desperate men. The corridor ahead was a nightmare of twisted metal and falling debris. Explosions rippled through the lower levels, shaking the very foundations of the mountain. Each step was a gamble. He could feel the vibrations through the soles of his boots, the building groaning, buckling, giving way. His suit's integrated comm system was a cacophony of static and distressed beeps, losing connection with Jessica, David, and Emily. He was alone in this collapsing tomb. He slid beneath a sagging beam, the rebar shrieking as it tore free from the concrete. A cloud of dust billowed up, momentarily blinding him. He coughed, his lungs burning, but pressed on, driven by a singular, desperate will to live. He could hear the distinct sound of pressurized pipes rupturing, the hiss of escaping steam adding to the symphony of destruction. The air grew hot, humid, and thick with the stench of burning insulation. Finally, he reached the access point to the service tunnel. It was partially blocked by a fallen pipe, but he could see a sliver of light from the other side, a distant, hopeful beacon. He didn't hesitate, throwing his shoulder against the obstruction, grunting with effort. The pipe groaned, shifted, and then with a final desperate shove it gave way, tumbling into the abyss below. He squeezed through the narrow opening, his suit catching on jagged edges, tearing slightly in places. The tunnel was a tight fit, forcing him to crawl on his hands and knees, the air becoming stale and thin. He could feel the mountain shifting above him, the tunnel walls groaning. He imagined the entire structure settling, crushing him like an insect. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm him, but he pushed it down, focusing on the rhythmic movement of his limbs, the steady beat of his own heart. He moved faster, ignoring the scrapes and the growing ache in his muscles, propelled by the image of Jessica's worried face, Emily's calm resolve, David's grim determination. They were waiting. They had to be. He was almost there. He knew the layout of these tunnels better than his own apartment, every twist and turn, every access panel, every dead end. He was counting on that intimate knowledge to save his life. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He burst out of the tunnel's termination point, a small, hidden alcove carved into the sheer rock face of the mountain, high above the valley floor. The cold night air hit him like a physical blow, shocking his system after the suffocating heat of the collapsing facility. He stumbled, gasping, collapsing against the rough rock, his body screaming in protest. And then he saw them. Jessica, David, and Emily were huddled together near their extraction vehicle, a specialized all-terrain transport disguised as a utility truck, its engine idling, ready for an immediate departure. Their faces, illuminated by the truck's dim interior lights, were a mixture of terror and profound relief. Jessica had her hand clamped over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. David was clutching a rifle, his knuckles white, his eyes wide with disbelief. Emily, ever the most composed, merely stared, her jaw slack. Behind them, the entire mountain facility, the supposedly impregnable stronghold, was no more. The ground began to tremble violently, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through his bones. The very air around them crackled with an unseen energy. They watched in horrified silence as the mountain began to buckle inward. Massive cracks like veins of lightning spiderwebbed across the rock face. Dust plumed skyward in colossal gray clouds obscuring the stars. Then, with a deafening final roar that eclipsed all other sounds, the mountain imploded. It wasn't an explosion outward, but an inward collapse, as if some gargantuan hand had simply squeezed the entire structure, crushing it into itself. The ground beneath them bucked and heaved, throwing Michael to his knees. Jessica screamed, a raw animal sound of pure terror. Emily stumbled, catching herself against the truck. David braced himself, his eyes fixed on the collapsing mountain, a silent prayer on his lips. Where the impenetrable vault had once stood, where the high-tech facility had been hidden beneath tons of rock, there was now only a vast, gaping maw, a crater of twisted metal and pulverized stone, slowly settling into itself. The air was thick with dust and the smell of burnt electronics, a chilling testament to the scale of the destruction. Silence, profound and absolute, descended upon the valley, broken only by Michael's ragged breathing and the soft hum of the truck's engine. He pushed himself up, every muscle screaming in protest, his head throbbing. He was bruised, battered, and utterly exhausted, but he was alive. He reached into his suit, his fingers closing around the cold, smooth surface of the obsidian chip. He pulled it out, holding it up for his team to see. The faint, internal luminescence pulsed, a tiny, defiant beacon in the overwhelming darkness. Jessica stared, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. David lowered his rifle, his gaze fixed on the small, unassuming object. Emily finally found her voice, a whisper barely audible above the ringing in Michael's ears. "What is it, Michael? What did you find?" He looked at the chip, then back at the colossal crater where the vault had been. The implosion wasn't a coincidence. It was a desperate, scorched earth response. They hadn't just stolen a prize, they had unleashed something. This wasn't merely a data chip, it was a key. A key to what? He didn't yet know, but the ruthless destruction of an entire facility to prevent its retrieval spoke volumes. They were no longer just thieves. They were now custodians of a secret so profound, so dangerous, that an entire mountain had been sacrificed to keep it buried. And whoever built that vault, whoever guarded that secret, would not stop until they got it back. The heist was over, but the real game had just begun. The roar of the engines was a symphony of success, a prelude to freedom Michael and his team had earned with their sweat and ingenuity. They were out. The impossible had been done. The impenetrable vault breached. The mountain conquered. As their private jet soared above the moonlit peaks, a wave of relief washed over them, quickly followed by the intoxicating rush of victory. Laughter, handshakes, the clinking of glasses. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated triumph. Even David, usually stoic, allowed a rare, wide grin to stretch across his face. Emily, ever the pragmatist, was already meticulously checking their escape routes and potential tail, but even she couldn't hide the sparkle in her eyes. Sarah, the tech wizard, was beaming, already brainstorming ways to monetize their newfound freedom. But for Michael, and especially for Jessica, the relief was fleeting. Beneath the surface of celebration, a cold dread began to seep in. They had taken something, yes, but what exactly? And from whom? The sheer scale of the vault, the fanatical devotion to its secrecy, screamed of forces far beyond anything they had ever encountered. This wasn't just a bank vault. This was a tomb for a truth so volatile, it could unravel the very fabric of their world. Days turned into a blur of frantic activity in their secluded safe house, nestled deep in the Nevada desert. The desert, ironically, felt less safe than the heart of the mountain they had just plundered. Jessica, her fingers flying across keyboards, was consumed by the contents of the secured container they had extracted. It wasn't a trove of jewels or stacks of bearer bonds, or even a hard drive filled with incriminating data on world leaders. It was something far more abstract, far more dangerous. The container held a single, unassuming crystalline device, humming with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. And alongside it, a collection of ancient-looking scrolls, not paper, but a material that defied carbon dating, inscribed with symbols Jessica had never seen, yet felt strangely familiar, like echoes from a forgotten dream. The device itself seemed to be a key, or perhaps a receiver, for something vast and intangible. It hummed in sync with a complex, multi-layered encryption on a series of data chips, also found within the container. "It's not just data, Michael," Jessica finally announced, her voice strained with fatigue and a growing sense of awe bordering on terror. "It's a framework, a protocol. It describes a system, an architecture, that has been silently operating beneath all known global networks for centuries. It's like discovering the internet didn't start in the 1960s, but existed in some form since the Bronze Age, controlled by a hidden hand." Michael leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the intricate schematics and translated fragments of the scrolls that Jessica had projected onto a holographic display. "A hidden hand? What kind of hand?" "The scrolls refer to the architects," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "They speak of shaping civilizations, guiding technological advancements, influencing major historical events, all through this hidden network. The device? It's a direct interface to it, a way to observe and potentially to manipulate." A chill snaked down Michael's spine. This wasn't a heist for profit. It was an accidental hijacking of history itself. They hadn't just stolen a secret. They had stumbled upon the keys to the kingdom, a kingdom they didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, outside their desert sanctuary, the first tremors of retaliation began. Emily, always vigilant, noticed it first. The satellite feeds they usually relied on for broad area surveillance began to show strange anomalies. Gaps in coverage, impossible patterns of movement, phantom signals that would appear and disappear without a trace. "They're not just looking for us, Michael," Emily stated grimly during one of their tense strategy meetings. "They're actively trying to blind us. And they're good. Too good. It's like they know our every move before we make it. Our secure comms are not so secure anymore. I'm seeing traces of highly advanced decryption attempts, far beyond any nation-state tech I've ever encountered." David, usually focused on physical security, felt it too. The subtle shifts in the desert winds, the unusual silence of the nocturnal animals, the sudden, inexplicable malfunction of a perimeter sensor. He was a man who lived by instinct, and every fiber of his being screamed danger. "We're being watched," he grunted, his hand instinctively going to the pistol holstered at his hip. Not just drones, not just cameras. Something else. Something unseen. Sarah, who had been trying to access external markets for their other, less dangerous spoils from the vault, some rare historical artifacts and uncatalogued precious metals, found herself hitting brick wall after brick wall. Every avenue she explored, every contact she reached out to seemed to dry up. Accounts frozen, digital footprints erased, trusted intermediaries suddenly unreachable. It's like the entire financial world has been subtly rearranged around us, Sarah explained, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by a furrowed brow. It's not a direct attack, not a hack. It's more like we've been isolated, cut off. Anything we touch turns to ash. They're not just after the device, Michael. They're trying to starve us out, to make us visible through desperation. The team, once a cohesive unit, began to fray at the edges. Paranoia set in, a creeping vine of suspicion that threatened to strangle their trust. Every shadow seemed to hold a watcher, every distant sound a potential threat. They were trapped in their own fortress, the desert stretching endlessly around them, not as a shield, but as a vast, inescapable arena. Michael, however, found a strange clarity amidst the chaos. He looked at the crystalline device, humming softly on Jessica's workbench. He looked at the ancient scrolls, their cryptic symbols now holding the weight of centuries of hidden influence. He looked at his team, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. They had thought they were stealing treasure. They had, in fact, awakened a slumbering leviathan. They want it back, Michael said, his voice calm, resolute. And they will stop at nothing. But we have something they don't. He gestured to the device. We have their secret, and with it we have leverage, or at least the potential for it. Jessica shook her head, her eyes still glued to the complex algorithms. Leverage against a group that can manipulate global networks and historical events? Michael, we're not playing chess. We're ants trying to negotiate with giants. Then we learn how the giants play, Michael retorted, a glint returning to his eyes. We didn't just steal a device. We stole their operating manual. Jessica, can you reverse engineer it? Can you understand how this architect system works? Can you find a way to use it, even if just to defend ourselves? Jessica hesitated, then nodded slowly. It's beyond anything I've ever seen. But there are patterns, a logic. If I can understand their language, I might be able to find a backdoor. A way to speak to the system, or at least listen in without being detected. Good, Michael said, a plan already forming in his mind. Because listening is exactly what we need to do. Emily, I need you to find their weak points. Not just ours, but theirs. Sarah, find me an untraceable communication channel, something so obscure it wouldn't even register on their radar. David, double our perimeter. Assume they're already inside our heads, and build a physical wall they can't breach. The game had indeed begun, but it wasn't a game of hide and seek. It was a game of information warfare, a silent battle for control over a truth that could redefine humanity. Michael knew they were outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered, but they had one thing the architects might not have anticipated: the audacity of a few determined individuals who had stumbled into their hidden world and now refused to simply disappear. The heist was over, but the fight for survival, and for the very future of knowledge, had just begun. And as the crystalline device pulsed softly in the quiet of the desert night, Michael wondered if they had truly stolen a treasure, or merely opened Pandora's box. The crystalline device pulsed softly in the quiet of the desert night. Michael wondered if they had truly stolen a treasure, or merely opened Pandora's box. The sand, still warm from the day's scorching sun, offered little comfort as the enormity of what they had done, and what they now possessed, truly began to settle in. Emily, ever the pragmatist, was already running diagnostics on their comms, ensuring their encrypted channels were secure, while David, surprisingly calm, meticulously packed their extraction gear back into the hidden compartment of their modified vehicle. Jessica, however, sat a little apart, her gaze fixed on the pulsating artifact, a look of profound unease etched onto her face. "It's done," Michael said, his voice a low rumble, breaking the heavy silence. "We got it." Emily nodded, her fingers flying across a tablet screen. "And the vault's defenses are still offline. We have a window, but it won't last. They'll be on us the moment they realize what happened." "They already know something happened," Jessica countered, her voice quiet but firm. "That facility wasn't just a vault. It was a fortress. The tremors, the power fluctuations, they'd have felt it across half the continent. They just don't know what yet." Michael looked at the crystalline device, now nestled securely in a specialized, shielded case David had retrieved. It continued its rhythmic, internal glow, a heartbeat of pure, alien light. "We need to move. Now. Our safe house in Nevada is our best bet for analysis. It's off-grid, shielded, and has the equipment Emily needs." The drive was long, silent, and fraught with tension. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every distant light a potential pursuer. The desert, once a symbol of freedom and escape, now felt like an exposed stage. They drove through the pre-dawn hours, the landscape gradually shifting from arid scrubland to the more rugged, mountainous terrain leading to their hidden sanctuary. As the first slivers of dawn painted the eastern sky, they finally arrived at a seemingly abandoned mining outpost, tucked away in a remote canyon. Beneath a derelict shed, a reinforced hatch led to their operational base, a surprisingly modern subterranean lab. The air, cool and filtered, offered a stark contrast to the desert heat. The moment they were inside, the crystalline device was carefully placed on a central examination table. Emily immediately began setting up an array of scanners and sensors, her usual excitement tempered by a newfound caution. David secured the perimeter, activating their advanced jamming systems and surveillance drones. Jessica, still unnerved, started brewing coffee, the mundane act a small anchor in a sea of extraordinary events. Michael just watched the device, his mind racing. "Okay," Emily announced, adjusting her glasses. "Initial scans are perplexing. It's not just data storage. It's alive in a way. The internal structure, the energy signature. It's unlike anything I've ever encountered. It's not conventional technology, not even advanced alien tech as we understand it." "What does that mean?" Michael asked, stepping closer. "It means it's fundamentally different. The energy it emits isn't electrical, or even a known exotic particle. It's a resonant frequency, a harmonic that seems to interact directly with consciousness." Jessica, handing Michael a mug of coffee, paused. "Consciousness? You mean it's not just storing information, it's communicating?" "Potentially," Emily replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But not in words or images. More like concepts, pure thought, and the sheer volume of information it contains. It's staggering. It's not just the library. It's an entire universe of knowledge compressed into that crystal." As Emily spoke, a faint, almost imperceptible hum began to emanate from the device. The air in the lab seemed to thicken, taking on a subtle shimmer. David, who had been monitoring the external sensors, suddenly swore. "Michael, you need to see this," he called out, gesturing to a large monitor displaying a topographical map of the surrounding area. "We've got movement, fast-moving aerial contacts, multiple signatures, and they're not showing up on any conventional radar." Emily's head snapped up. "That's impossible. Our jammers should block everything within a 50-mile radius." "They're not conventional either," David said, zooming in on the map. Several small, rapidly moving red dots were converging on their position. Their energy signatures are similar to the vault's defense grid, and they're closing in. Fast. Michael felt a cold dread creep up his spine. "They found us already? How?" Jessica's eyes widened, darting from the monitor to the pulsing crystal. "The device," Emily said, "it interacts with consciousness. What if it's not just receiving but also broadcasting? A beacon? Or maybe a homing signal we didn't detect?" Emily frantically adjusted her scanners. "It's possible. If its energy signature is unique, they could be tracking that. It's not emitting anything we'd normally classify as a signal, but if their tech is attuned to its specific resonance." The hum from the crystal intensified, and a faint light began to spread across the lab, emanating from the device. It wasn't just physical light. It felt like an internal illumination, a presence. Michael felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, a sudden influx of fragmented thoughts and images that weren't his own. He saw flashes of ancient civilizations, complex mathematical equations, and star charts far beyond anything known to humanity. It was overwhelming, disorienting. "Get it back in the shielded case," Michael yelled, clutching his head. "Now." Emily, equally affected by the strange mental influx, struggled against the growing pressure. "I can't. It's projecting. It's like it's trying to download itself directly into our minds." David rushed forward, heedless of the mental assault, trying to force the heavy lid of the shielded case shut. But as his hand touched the crystal, a jolt of pure energy coursed through him. He cried out, stumbling back, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and something akin to awe. It's like touching pure thought," David gasped, shaking his head. "It showed me everything. The universe. The connections." The red dots on David's monitor were now almost directly overhead. The sound of high-frequency pulses began to reverberate through the canyon, penetrating the bunker's defenses. The air pressure outside plummeted, then surged, as if an invisible force was pressing down on their hidden sanctuary. "They're here," Jessica whispered, her hand instinctively going to the pistol at her hip. "And they're not subtle." Michael knew they were in trouble. This wasn't just a pursuit, it was an extraction. The organization wasn't interested in punishing them. They wanted their property back, and they were willing to tear the mountain apart to get it. The device, meanwhile, continued its silent, powerful broadcast, its light growing brighter, the mental torrent intensifying. It was as if the vault had been a prison, and by releasing the crystal, they had unleashed a force far beyond their comprehension, attracting attention from entities far more powerful than they could have imagined. "We have to move the device," Michael declared, his voice firm despite the chaos in his mind. "It's a beacon. We can't analyze it here. We need to get it somewhere it can't be tracked, somewhere it can't affect us like this." Emily, wiping a trickle of blood from her nose, nodded grimly. "It's not just a beacon, Michael. It's waking up. And whatever it is, it's attracting more than just the vault's security forces." Just as she finished speaking, a massive tremor shook the bunker. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the lights flickered violently. A deep, resonating hum, far more powerful than the crystals, began to echo from above, a sound that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. It was a sound of immense power, of advanced technology flexing its muscles. The red dots on David's screen were no longer just overhead. They were actively engaging, probing their defenses. "They're trying to bore through the rock," David yelled over the growing noise. "Some kind of sonic disruptor. Our shielding won't hold for long." Michael looked at the crystalline device, now glowing with an almost blinding intensity, the mental noise a deafening roar in his head. He had thought they were stealing a secret. He had thought they were acquiring knowledge. But he was wrong. They hadn't stolen from the vault. They had stolen for it. Or perhaps they had merely been pawns, activated by the device itself, to bring it out into the world. The question of who or what truly controlled this ancient, powerful artifact suddenly became terrifyingly clear. And as the bunker groaned under the relentless assault, Michael realized that their true mission, and the terrifying implications of the crystal's power, had only just begun to reveal themselves. The bunker shuddered again, a low guttural groan echoing through the reinforced steel. Dust rained from the ceiling in fine, gray sheets, catching in the emergency lights that flickered erratically. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, dawning dread that was far worse. He looked at the pulsating crystal, now radiating an almost hypnotic violet light, and the pieces clicked into place with horrifying precision. This wasn't just a heist gone wrong. This wasn't about money or fame. The vault wasn't built to protect priceless jewels, but to contain something infinitely more dangerous. The unbreakable reputation wasn't a challenge, it was a desperate warning. And they, in their arrogance, had ignored it. "Michael, we're losing power." Jessica's voice, usually so steady, was laced with a frantic edge. She was hunched over a console, fingers flying across a dying screen, the complex schematics of the bunker's defenses flashing red. "They're targeting the auxiliary generators. We have maybe 10 minutes before full blackout." "Who are they, Jessica?" Michael demanded, his voice low and urgent. He moved towards her, his gaze sweeping the monitors that still showed grainy feeds of the exterior. Nothing but blurred motion, flashes of light, and the relentless pounding that vibrated through the very floor beneath their feet. "I don't know, Michael. The signatures are scrambled, but they're using heavy-grade sonic disruptors and thermal lances. This isn't a typical extraction team. This is a siege." She spun around, her eyes wide, reflecting the eerie violet glow of the crystal. "What did we find, Michael? What is this thing?" He looked at the crystal, then back at Jessica. "It's not just an artifact, Jessica. It's a catalyst, a weapon, and I think it's what they've been searching for, not the vault itself." Another deafening impact rocked the bunker, throwing them both off balance. A shower of sparks erupted from an exposed conduit, plunging a section of the corridor into sudden darkness. The air grew heavy, charged with an ozone smell, and a faint high-pitched whine began to emanate from the crystal. It wasn't just light it was giving off now. It felt like pressure, a subtle warping of the air around it. "The true mission," Michael murmured, more to himself than to Jessica, "was never about stealing it. It was about unleashing it." or perhaps preventing its unleashing. He remembered the cryptic notes in the vault's forgotten archives, the hastily scrawled warnings about entropic cascade and reality slippage. He dismissed them as paranoid ramblings of a long-dead eccentric. Now they sounded like prophecies. The crystal pulsed faster, the violet light intensifying, casting sharp, dancing shadows across their faces. The high-pitched whine grew into a resonant hum that vibrated in their bones. Jessica cried out, clutching her head. It's doing something. It's interfering with the communication channels, with my thoughts. Michael felt it too, a subtle disquiet in his mind, a feeling of static, of thoughts becoming fragmented. Was the crystal affecting them directly? Was this its power? He had to push past it. He had to think. We need to get it out of here or secure it, Michael said, his voice strained. If they get their hands on it, or if it destabilizes this entire region, the world could be in unimaginable danger. Get it out where, Michael? The bunker's compromised. And how do we even move it? It's radiating some kind of energy field. Jessica pointed at a small handheld scanner she'd managed to get working. The display was a blur of chaotic readings, energy spikes off the charts, but one thing was clear. Touching the crystal felt increasingly perilous. Just then a klaxon blared, a piercing, insistent shriek that cut through the rumbling of the assault. A voice, synthesized and cold, crackled through the comms. This is Unit Alpha 7. You are in possession of a high-priority asset. Surrender the artifact immediately, and your lives will be spared. Failure to comply will result in complete system annihilation. The voice was devoid of emotion, robotic, and utterly chilling. This wasn't a commercial security force. This was something far more advanced, far more ruthless. Alpha 7, Michael repeated, a name that conjured images of black ops and clandestine government projects. They knew we were coming. They wanted us to open the vault. A distraction? Jessica gasped, the realization dawning on her too. We were the key, the patsy. They used us to bypass the vault's primary defenses, knowing we'd crack it, then swooped in to take the prize. The implications were staggering. Every step they had taken, every careful plan, every risk, had been orchestrated by an unseen hand. They weren't master thieves, they were unwitting tools. Michael felt a surge of cold fury. He wouldn't be anyone's puppet. We're not surrendering anything, Michael growled into the comms, though he knew it was futile. This artifact stays out of your hands. A moment of silence, then the synthesized voice returned, colder, sharper. Designation, Michael Vance. Designation, Jessica Hayes. Your refusal has been noted. Initiating Stage 2 protocol. Containment breach imminent. The klaxon intensified and a new, more terrifying sound joined the chorus. The grinding of heavy machinery directly above them, followed by a series of explosive charges. The ceiling directly over the crystal began to crack, thin fissures spreading like spiderwebs across the reinforced concrete. They're coming through the roof, Jessica yelled, pointing upwards. They're trying to drop directly onto the artifact. Michael's mind raced. They were trapped. The bunker was failing. The crystal was radiating an unknown, potentially dangerous energy, and a highly organized, ruthless force was literally tearing the ceiling down to get to it. We need a distraction, Michael said, looking around the rapidly deteriorating bunker. Something big. Something that will buy us time to figure out what this thing actually does and how to control it. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, was already scanning the bunker's remaining systems. The auxiliary power conduits are overloaded. If I could reroute the main energy flow through the ventilation system, it might cause a massive localized EMP, enough to fry their external sensors for a few minutes. Can you do it without blowing us all up? Michael asked, a hint of desperation in his voice. Maybe, she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. But it would mean shutting down almost all remaining power to the rest of the bunker. We'd be blind, deaf, and defenseless. We're already close to that, Michael countered. He glanced at the ceiling again. The cracks were widening, dust and small chunks of concrete now falling around the crystal. Do it, Jessica. We need a window, even a small one. As Jessica began frantically typing, sparks flying from her console, Michael turned his attention back to the crystal. Its violet glow pulsed violently, mirroring the impacts from above. He reached out a hesitant hand, feeling the strange, almost magnetic pull emanating from it. It was hot, not with a burning heat, but an internal warmth like a contained star. He remembered the faint etchings on its surface, almost invisible until the light hit them just right. They weren't symbols of power, he realized now, but of containment. Wards. Runes meant to dampen its energy, not amplify it. And they were fading, slowly dissolving under the constant pressure of the crystal's raw power. The entropic cascade. Michael's blood ran cold. If these containment wards failed completely, what would happen? What kind of reality slippage could occur? He imagined dimensions tearing, matter dissolving, the very fabric of existence unraveling. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a potential apocalypse. A final, colossal impact shook the bunker, and a section of the ceiling directly above the crystal collapsed with a deafening roar. A jagged hole ringed by twisted rebar opened to the night sky, revealing the dark silhouette of a massive, heavily armored drone hovering directly overhead. Its underside bristled with an array of exotic weaponry. Through the hole, a grappling hook descended, followed by two figures in sleek, black combat suits, their faces obscured by helmets. They were fast, efficient, moving with the trained precision of special forces. Their weapons, unlike anything Michael had ever seen, hummed with suppressed energy. "They're here!" Jessica screamed, pulling a small sidearm from her belt, a weapon that suddenly felt woefully inadequate. "Almost there, Michael. Just a few more seconds." Her fingers flew across the console, sweat beading on her forehead. Michael knew they wouldn't have a few more seconds. The two figures landed silently, scanning the room, their eyes, visible through narrow slits in their helmets, immediately fixed on the crystal. One of them raised a weapon, aiming directly at the artifact. "No!" Michael roared, instinctively lunging forward, throwing himself between the crystal and the approaching threat. He didn't know why, didn't know what he hoped to achieve. He just knew he couldn't let them have it. Not like this. As he moved, the crystal surged, its violet light flaring with blinding intensity. The hum became a shriek. The air around him shimmered, distorting the figures of the approaching soldiers. For a split second, Michael felt a profound connection to the artifact, a surge of raw, untamed power coursing through him. He saw images flash in his mind. Ancient civilizations, cosmic energies, the very fabric of space and time twisting and reforming. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. Then, with a deafening crack that reverberated through the entire bunker, Jessica hit the switch. The lights went out. The monitors died. The emergency generator sputtered into silence. Absolute darkness descended, thick and suffocating. The only illumination came from the crystal, now pulsing with a furious, almost angry violet glow, and the muzzle flashes of the incoming soldiers' weapons as they fired wildly into the sudden void. Michael, disoriented by the sensory overload and the strange surge of power, felt a burning sensation in his hands, a residual energy from his brief connection with the artifact. He heard Jessica cry out, heard the heavy thud of boots, the clang of metal. He was in the center of it all, a human shield, completely blind but strangely, unnervingly aware. The darkness, though absolute, seemed to part for him. He could almost feel the soldiers moving, sense their positions, hear their panicked breathing beneath their helmets. The crystal's power, he realized, had just given him a terrifying, impossible gift, and he had no idea how to use it, or if it was slowly consuming him. The sudden influx of raw information overwhelmed Michael. It wasn't just sight or sound, but a primal awareness, a deep hum beneath reality that vibrated with the presence of others. The soldiers weren't just dots on a mental map. They were complex, living beings, their fear a palpable taste in the air, their intent a sharp, cold edge. He could feel the slight tremor in Sergeant Miller's right hand, the tension in his jaw, the almost imperceptible hesitation in his stride. He knew with absolute certainty that Miller was leading the main assault, driven by a desperate need to reclaim the crystal and erase this monumental failure. This wasn't a trick of the light, or a hallucination born of stress. This was real. The crystal pulsed, a constant, low thrum against his palm, a living thing connected to his nervous system. It was feeding him reality, unfiltered, amplified. But it was also a torrent threatening to drown him. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the awareness persisted. An internal radar locked onto every moving piece within the massive, layered structure of the vault. He could feel the cold steel of the walls, the intricate network of pipes and conduits, the very air vibrating with the distant hum of the facility's generators. It was too much. His head throbbed, a drumbeat matching the frantic pace of his heart. He felt a phantom pressure behind his eyes, as if his optic nerves were straining to process 1,000 images at once. He staggered back, bumping against the smooth, cool surface of the crystal's pedestal, his breath catching in his throat. The soldiers were closer now. 3 of them were fanning out in the main corridor outside the chamber, their heavy boots thudding softly on the reinforced floor. He could hear their comms, a low crackle of static and clipped commands, though the words themselves were a jumble, just another layer of the overwhelming sensory soup. Miller was directing them, his voice tight with an urgency that spoke of dwindling time. Michael opened his eyes, scanning the chamber. There were no vents, no obvious hiding places that wouldn't be immediately obvious to a trained team. He was trapped, but then a flicker, a different kind of awareness. Not just the soldiers but the structure itself. He felt the subtle give in a section of the wall near the access panel for the environmental controls, a faint resonance that suggested a cavity, a hidden space. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but the crystal was showing him something. He moved, his movements jerky, uncoordinated, still wrestling with the sensory overload. He pressed his palm against the cold metal panel, focusing. The hum intensified. He felt the vibrations of the soldiers' boots through the floor, their breathing through the air, the faint click of their weapons being readied. He had to act. Now, with a surge of adrenaline, he twisted the panel, pulling at the edge he'd felt give. It resisted, but the crystal in his hand seemed to hum with a new intensity, a focused power. He felt a strange confidence, a sudden clarity amidst the chaos. He wasn't just pulling. He was willing it open. A faint click, then a groan of protesting metal. The panel, designed to be tamper-proof, swung inward, revealing a narrow, dark shaft. It was a maintenance conduit, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, leading down into the vault's forgotten underbelly. He slipped inside, the darkness absolute, the air thick with the smell of dust and ozone. He pulled the panel shut behind him, the click echoing unervingly in the confined space. The crystal in his hand was his only light, emitting a soft, ethereal glow that barely illuminated the cramped shaft. He could still feel them, the soldiers, their presence a searing brand against his heightened senses. They were at the chamber door, their footsteps louder now, the metallic scrape of their keycard attempting to breach the lock. They're inside. Miller's voice, clear and sharp, echoed in Michael's mind, not through his ears, but as if the thought had been plucked directly from Miller's brain and deposited into his own. He's here. Find him. Michael felt a jolt of pure terror. He wasn't just sensing them, he was hearing their thoughts. Or was it just an amplification so extreme it felt like thought? He couldn't distinguish. The crystal's power was evolving, spiraling beyond his comprehension. He scrambled down the shaft, his hands scraping against rough metal, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached a junction, a wider conduit branching off into 2 directions. He hesitated, the overwhelming sensory input making it impossible to think clearly. Which way? The crystal thrummed, and suddenly the left path felt colder. Not in temperature, but in a deeper, more primal sense. The right path resonated with a faint warmth, a distant echo of the facility's power core. The soldiers, he felt, were moving into the chamber, their voices raised in frustration as they found it empty. Miller, he sensed, was furious, his thoughts a chaotic storm of anger and bewilderment. He chose the right path, crawling faster, the air growing warmer, thicker. The conduit sloped downwards, leading him deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the vault. He could feel the energy radiating from the crystal, a strange mixture of exhilaration and dread. Was it helping him or was it driving him mad? He felt a strange detachment, as if his own body was simply a vessel, steered by an unseen force. He heard them then, not just through the crystal, but through the thin metal of the conduit walls. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing from somewhere above and behind him. They had found the maintenance shaft. Miller was smarter than he gave him credit for. Split up. Miller's voice, actual sound now, not just a phantom thought, vibrated through the metal. He can't have gone far. Check every branch. Don't let him out of this section. Panic flared, sharp and cold. He was trapped in a metal maze. He pushed himself harder, ignoring the burning in his muscles, the scrapes on his hands. The crystal glowed brighter, its light pulsing with his accelerated heartbeat. He felt a surge of something new, something aggressive, a desire not just to escape but to evade, to outsmart. He rounded a bend, and the conduit opened into a larger, cavernous space. It was a forgotten access tunnel, filled with ancient, dust-covered machinery, massive pipes snaking across the ceiling like metallic serpents. The air here was stagnant, heavy, but there was a faint, almost imperceptible current of fresh air, suggesting a connection to an outside vent, or perhaps another, even deeper level. He dropped to the floor, landing with a soft thud, the crystal's light casting long dancing shadows. He felt the soldiers closing in, their presence a tangible pressure. One was directly above the shaft he'd just exited, peering down. Another was moving along the conduit he'd taken, slower, more cautious. And Miller, he sensed, was moving towards the main access point of this forgotten tunnel, trying to cut off his escape. He was caught in a pincer movement. But the crystal, what else could it do? He held it up, its light illuminating a section of the wall. Not just the wall but the stress points within the wall. The hidden conduits, the weakened sections, the almost invisible seams. It was like seeing the blueprint of the vault laid bare, not on paper, but in the very fabric of reality. He focused, pushing against the overwhelming sensory flood, trying to harness the power. He felt a strange resonance with the metal around him, an intuitive understanding of its properties. He saw a section of heavy-gauge pipe running along the ceiling, directly over where he sensed Miller would be entering. He saw the bolts holding it in place, felt their slight fatigue, their vulnerability. It was a crazy idea, an impossible idea, but the crystal was screaming at him, showing him. He reached up, touching the pipe. He didn't just touch it. He felt its internal structure, the faint vibrations of the water or coolant flowing through it. He closed his eyes, concentrating, willing the bolts to give. He focused all of his mental energy, all of the crystal's raw power on that single point. A low groan emanated from the pipe, a sound of stressed metal, then a sharp crack. One bolt snapped, then another. The pipe shuddered, listing precariously. He felt Miller's presence growing stronger, closer, just around the corner, his footsteps heavy. Michael pushed harder, a primal scream building in his chest. The crystal pulsed violently in his hand, its light flaring. He felt a searing pain behind his eyes, a burning sensation in his brain, as if his mind was being stretched to its absolute limit, threatening to tear apart. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. With a final deafening clang, the massive pipe ripped free from its moorings, crashing down with incredible force. A geyser of high-pressure liquid erupted, spraying across the cavernous tunnel. A shout of surprise, then a grunt of pain. Miller. He felt it. A sudden jolt of impact, a flash of surprise and agony from the sergeant. Michael gasped, collapsing against the wall, the crystal's light dimming to a faint glow. He was shaking uncontrollably, his entire body racked with tremors. He felt utterly drained, as if every ounce of his energy had been siphoned away. But the path to his escape was clear, at least for a moment. He had bought himself time. He had used the crystal, and it had almost broken him. He could still feel the other soldiers, their confusion, their shouts as they tried to assess the situation, their comms crackling with frantic updates. They were scrambling, diverted by the collapsed pipe and the torrent of water. He had to keep moving. He looked down at the crystal in his hand. It no longer felt like a tool. It felt like an extension of himself, a part of his very being. But a dangerous part, a part that demanded more than he was willing to give. It had shown him not just the vault's weaknesses, but the soldiers' vulnerabilities, their fears, their pain. He had acted on instinct, driven by a desperate need for survival, but the ease with which he had caused harm, the cold calculation, sent a shiver down his spine. He pushed himself up, his legs wobbly, his head still pounding. He moved deeper into the forgotten tunnel, guided by the faint current of fresh air. He had to find a way out, not just from the vault, but from the crystal's terrifying grip. He wasn't just fighting soldiers anymore. He was fighting for his own mind, his own soul. The crystal had given him power, an unimaginable power, but at what cost? He could feel the whispers now, not just thoughts but suggestions, subtly nudging him, urging him to embrace the chaos, to use his newfound abilities to their fullest, to become something more than human. He could almost hear it laughing, a silent, chilling sound that echoed in the deepest corners of his mind. He was no longer just a thief. He was a conduit, a vessel, and the crystal was the navigator. He had to break free. He had to. He had to break free. He had to. The crystal pulsed, a malevolent heart beating against his palm, its tendrils of ice and fire now not just guiding but commanding. Michael felt his fingers twitch, his arm rising independent of his will, aiming for the final intricate lock mechanism. A wave of euphoria, not his own, washed over him, promising ultimate power, ultimate knowledge, if only he would surrender. But beneath the crystal's dominant hum, a spark of defiance flickered within him. It was a faint ember, but it was his. He remembered the thrill of his first successful heist, the quiet satisfaction of outsmarting the unoutsmartable, that feeling, that sense of self-mastery was being erased, replaced by a cold alien purpose. He was Michael, the man who picked locks, who danced through laser grids, who saw patterns where others saw chaos. He wasn't a puppet. He wouldn't be. No, he whispered, the word a rasp against the crystal's silent roar. He tried to pull his hand away, but the grip was absolute. His muscles screamed, torn between the crystal's will and his own desperate rebellion. He felt his mind fragmenting, images flashing, his life, his identity dissolving into a stream of raw data. But within that chaotic stream, a different kind of pattern emerged. The vault. Its ancient energy wasn't just a barrier. It was a complex system. And Michael, the master of systems, saw a flicker of possibility. The crystal wanted to open the vault. But what if the vault wasn't meant to be opened at all? What if its unbreakable nature was a containment, a prison? And what if the crystal itself was not a key, but a prisoner trying to escape, or a tool trying to free something far more dangerous? The crystal pulsed again intensely, a jolt that threatened to shatter his very bones. It was close. The final sequence. He could feel the ancient tumblers aligning, the air crackling with immense suppressed power. This wasn't about gold or jewels. This was about unleashing something. He focused, not on resisting the crystal's physical pull, but on understanding the vault's underlying architecture. He let the crystal guide his hand, letting it believe it was winning, but his mind raced, searching for anomalies, for fail-safes. Every great security system had a back door, a kill switch, a way to resecure it in an emergency. This vault, built by an intelligence far beyond human, would surely have one. He felt the crystal's consciousness surge, anticipating victory. It forced his fingers to key in a complex series of symbols on the vault's ancient interface. But as his fingers moved, Michael subtly altered a single input, a tiny deviation, a fraction of a degree in a rotational sequence. It was a microscopic act of defiance, hidden within the crystal's own command. He was using its power against itself. A ripple ran through the vault's surface, not the sound of opening, but of something shifting deeper within. The crystal paused, its energy wavering for a split second, sensing the subtle betrayal. Its silent roar turned into a shriek of pure, unadulterated fury. It tried to override him, to correct his deviation, but Michael held firm, his will a stubborn wall against its onslaught. He channeled every ounce of his focus, every memory of every lock he'd ever picked, every system he'd ever bypassed, into this single desperate maneuver. He wasn't trying to open the vault anymore. He was trying to reseal it. He was trying to trap whatever the crystal intended to unleash, and perhaps trap the crystal itself. The air in the chamber grew heavy, charged with an invisible force. The symbols on the vault's interface glowed a furious red, then a blinding white. The crystal in his hand vibrated violently, its light flickering, warring with the vault's ancient energy. Michael felt his own body being torn apart, his mind a battlefield where two titanic wills clashed. With a final, agonizing surge of his own will, he forced his hand to complete the altered sequence. A deafening crack echoed through the chamber, not from the vault opening, but from the crystal itself. A spiderweb of fracture spread across its surface, its malevolent light dimming, then flaring one last time in a silent, desperate scream of pure rage. The vault didn't open. Instead, with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor and echoed in Michael's bones, the intricate mechanisms within its depths shifted. He heard the colossal grinding of ancient gears, not unlocking but locking down, sealing tighter than before. The symbols on the interface pulsed a final, calming blue, then faded into utter darkness. The vault was not just resealed. It felt somehow dormant. The crystal in Michael's hand went cold. The light died completely, leaving it an inert, dull stone, fractured and lifeless. The oppressive weight lifted from his mind, replaced by a dizzying emptiness, then a wave of profound exhaustion. He stumbled back, collapsing against the cold metal floor, gasping for breath, his body trembling uncontrollably. He looked at the crystal, now just a shard of rock. He had broken free. He had won. But at what cost? He had stared into an abyss of ancient power, and he had seen something truly terrifying. The vault wasn't a repository of earthly riches. It was a containment unit, a prison for something vast and unknowable, and the crystal had been its desperate, millennia-long key, slowly wearing down the seals, waiting for a suitable mind to complete its task. Michael had been that mind, but he had refused to be its puppet. He pushed himself up, his muscles aching, his head pounding. The chamber was silent now, the air still and heavy, the metallic scent of ancient power slowly dissipating. He was alone, utterly alone, in the heart of the most secure, most mysterious vault in the world. He had to get out. Retracing his steps, Michael found his way back through the labyrinthine corridors, the laser grids, the pressure plates. This time he moved with a different kind of purpose. The thrill of the heist was gone, replaced by a grim determination. He wasn't escaping with a fortune. He was escaping with a secret, a burden that would forever change him. He bypassed the final security door, the one he had meticulously opened hours ago, now feeling like a trivial obstacle. The cool night air hit him as he emerged onto the remote mountain slope, the stars glittering indifferent above. He looked back at the mountain, at the hidden entrance to the vault, now indistinguishable from the rock face. It was still there, silent and formidable, its ancient secret now deeper, more secure. Thanks to his unwilling intervention, Michael never pulled another heist. The incident at the Unbreakable Vault had fundamentally altered his perception of the world. The thrill of outsmarting systems, the allure of forbidden riches, all seemed trivial in the face of the ancient power he had encountered. He carried the knowledge of something vast, something that lurked just beneath the surface of reality, contained by structures that defied human understanding. He had seen the true nature of an unbreakable vault, not a place to keep things in, but a place to keep things out, or perhaps to keep things contained. He spent the rest of his life as a quiet, reclusive man, occasionally working as a high-level security consultant, designing systems that were truly impenetrable, not just for money, but to ensure that what he had encountered remained sealed away. He lived with the chilling knowledge that there were forces in the universe far greater than human ambition, and that sometimes the greatest treasures were not to be found, but to be protected. The Unbreakable Vault remained, a silent monument to a secret war, and Michael, the master thief who became an accidental guardian, carried its chilling legacy until his dying day.